It's Thursday morning here with Nathan Kinch for another episode of whatever we're going to call this YouTube channel, but it's a something. My absolute pleasure to have you with us. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. We've obviously known each other for a few years now and traded sort of thoughts around the work that you do and the work that I do, but I thought this would be an interesting chat given where we're at in the world and in life at the moment. So the way we do things around here is ask you to do a very quick 1 minute overview of who you are and what you do.
Cool, mate. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. And to anyone that's investing the time, thank you for being here with us. I hope that you get something out of this that you can walk away and ideally act upon in a way that benefits you and others that you care about. So, as Simon said, my name's Simon said, my name's
That's what we should call it.
Yes, that's a great idea. Simon says. So, the bulk of my career I've spent focusing on how to support organizations in being more ethical and trustworthy with data-driven technologies. That has taken me on a wild and sort of turbulent career trajectory. I've lived in lots of different parts of the world. I've been fortunate to work with federal government on very, very major projects, large Fortune 500 companies all around the world across different jurisdictions, all the way down to very early stage startups that are doing ambitious stuff. For the last 3 years, I've been one of the co-founders and CEO of a company called Greater Than X. We are a specialist services firm, research, design, and strategic advisory. And we sort of worked at the forefront of the personal information economy, helping organizations design more trustworthy products and services, primarily through empirical methods. And more recently, the Chief Platform Officer of Greater Than X, Matt Micker, and I, we've embarked on a new venture called Greater Than Learning. And we're designing, and that's going to launch in about a month. Actually, it's going to go into private preview in about a month, and it will launch publicly, 4 weeks after that. And we're designing what we believe is the first dedicated community and social learning platform for ethical change makers. And it's really an extension on what we've spent our careers doing and something that we hope has the ability to scale our impact.
Beautiful. Fantastic. So I think the basis of the chat we were going to have today is, in this strange world that we're living in and so many people working from home, we've got probably more people than ever using digital platforms and tools that they might not have used before in the interest of collaboration, and probably giving up more personal data than they ever have before. And I think potentially sort of non-digital natives using some of these things for the first time. There's obviously some risk in that. What does that mean from a trust perspective and the way that we use those products and tools?
I think it's a pretty broad question. So that kind of depends on how we look at it, from where we look at it, whom we're looking at it for. If you think about it from an organization standpoint, arguably, organizations have more of a responsibility than ever before to become adept at privacy, security, data protection, data ethics. What I think, and I might just reference some literature on this topic to help frame the discussion. So, trust is kind of the thing that like glues together social relationships. It's like the only reason that money works is because we trust in its value and its reuse, etc., etc. Like it's really important. It's a very big topic. It's super hard to cover in 30 minutes. So we'll probably end up talking about like tighter, like different aspects of trust, and specifically data trust, which is like the trust that people place in an organization's data practices. So we all kind of recognize intuitively that it's a very important thing, right? If it's there, things feel good. Like if you're in a high trust relationship, say with your partner, like your life partner, your business partner, your kids, your family, within your organizational context with B2B partners, like stuff feels good, stuff works, right? If it's not there, we really notice it. That's when we start realizing friction and all these different behaviors that are associated with low trust environments. But what our current state of the world means in the context of trust is really challenging. And again, we have to look at it from different perspectives. So for organizations, they've got to start thinking about things differently. And we can talk about the specific actions they can be taking, hopefully throughout this call. For individuals, this is a really interesting one as well, because if you look at the data on this topic, like from an organization standpoint, one thing that's become relatively clear is that trust directly impacts business performance. And a particular study that I found quite interesting was Accenture's Competitive Agility Index from late 2018, right? It's basically a systematic review of the performance of 7,030 companies. So it's a pretty big sample size, right? And they're looking at different indicators that impact an organization's competitiveness and bottom line business metrics that organizations really care about, particularly public companies, publicly traded stocks. And what they found was that trust disproportionately impacts bottom line business drivers like growth metrics, EBITDA, etc. Now, the Edelman Trust Barometer, which is perhaps the most extensive, kind of like widely available resource on trust, macro, micro, this year called out that ethics is 3 times more important to trust than competence. Yet most organizations overinvest in initiatives that will enhance their competence, and they underinvest in initiatives that enhance the ethics of how they behave as an organization. Therefore, they're failing at the trust game, right? There's a trust gap, trust deficit. So organizations need to identify that stuff, pay attention to it. Coming to individuals, like what do we do in our everyday lives, right? I think that the Pew Research Center's 2019 privacy study was really compelling. Now, the data, this is kind of like attitudinal data, right? It's sort of qualitative. We're looking at stated preference rather than revealed preference, but it hasn't changed all that much. But Pew's 2019 study was interesting because it called out that and this was US focused, that US consumers were more concerned than ever before about how their data was being used. And that basically, like, they didn't feel protected. They didn't feel like they had control. They didn't feel like they had influence. They felt disempowered. They felt apathetic. And they didn't believe that they were getting like appropriate benefits in exchange for what they were giving up, what they were sharing, either explicitly or implicitly, right? So people are also more aware about this. Like individuals are more aware about this stuff than ever before. And like there are some really simple things that we can do as individuals. And the first is when we're making a decision about a product, a service, a workflow, whatever, pause and think. Most of us sign up to products and services. And so you know how when you sign up, right, there's a few form fields. There's kind of like enter your username, enter your email, enter your password, re-enter your password, sign up. And then below the sign up, there's like these embedded links. By signing up, you agree to our terms of service, our privacy policy. It's actually not lawful to get someone to agree to a privacy policy. That's just a really bad practice. We won't dive down that rabbit hole. But, you know, and people do what we refer to as the agreement bypass bias. The data is very clear on this. People do not interact with those agreements, right? They sign up and they get to what they want. And organizations deliberately design those experiences that way. What you can do as an individual is step back for a moment. Don't hit the button, just pause for 5 seconds. Do I actually think that this company is going to use my data respectfully?
Yeah.
It's not just like, are they not doing the right thing, right? Because that's the way it's typically framed. Or do I trust them to not do the right thing? Yeah, that's mentioned. But the other is, are they doing everything they can to do the right thing? Yeah. Right? Which is the other way to look at it. Just think about that. That in of itself, that 5 to 10 second pause is, I believe, as a starting point, as a tiny step that everyone can do, the number one thing that we as individuals should be acting upon immediately.
Cool. And there's so many ways we could go on this, and you're right. So 30 seconds is not going to, 30 minutes is not going to be long enough. So 2 things. In the moment, do we care enough? Or do we just want the thing? We just want to use the thing because it's helping us achieve what we need to do right now. And maybe that's sort of part of the problem, is that very few of us sort of plan out, okay, so in the future we're going to need this. So I'm going to research all these products. Quite often it's a reactionary thing, right? oh shit, I've got to get a contract out to someone, and they don't have a fax machine, so I've got to get on DocuSign and just get it out the door, or whatever you're going to use.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing. The other thing I was going to ask you was, there's obviously been some sort of relatively sort of high profile breaches and things around data that have been in the media. So, a couple of years ago, Equifax, had a large scale data breach.
Yeah.
There was a Zoom recently, and probably one of the biggest ones from a few years ago, the whole Cambridge Analytica using data to sway influence and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think when these sorts of things happen, we sort of collectively have a bit of a rah-rah moment? These businesses, it's big businesses, using our data, and we're the commodity, and we all get upset about it for a few minutes, but then we just go back to doing what we're doing because we like the convenience.
Yeah. So I'll tackle those two questions independently. They're actually super related to one another, but I'll just tackle them sequentially. So the first one, do we care? It's actually it's a really valid question, and it's something that is brought into question frequently. On the topic of we discount the future, that's often referred to as hyperbolic discounting or future discounting in behavioral economics. And there's lots of different reasons for that, right? From an evolutionary standpoint, that probably made sense, right? Surviving in the now matters more than what might speculatively happen a week from now or 10 years down the track, right? So yes, we are better at sort of immediate gratification and actions that support immediate gratification than we are in the context of future planning and all these different types of things. So that is important to recognize. However, I think the way that it's often framed, do we care enough, is not reflective of the actual situation. And I think what it does is, and this is a common mistake that's made, we put decision-making contexts largely in the realm of psychology, like what is going on in our head.
Yeah.
And it's like we try and disconnect that from the broader socio-political and socio-economic context, which is not how life works. There are just heaps of interdependencies. Everything is interconnected in some way, shape, or form. And so when you go to make a decision about using DocuSign or whatever, right? And I don't have a particular perspective on DocuSign's practices. I've actually never critically interrogated them, but that just to keep with that example, it's not that you don't care about your fundamental rights and freedoms and being treated respectfully and all that different type of stuff. It's just that at that point in time, you're motivated by a particular outcome and therefore engaged in an activity. And then the context of that activity, where all of this stuff that's important about how your rights are respected, how your data is being used, etc., that stuff's deliberately hidden away from you, right? Organizations don't want to be open, transparent. They don't have participatory governance structures. They don't want to be truly accountable to their actions, right? They don't want to do any of that regardless of what they say. Their actions speak otherwise, right? So I think it is an important point on organizational culture. Organizational culture is not what an organization says, it's what an organization consistently does, right? There's some recent research that came out that looked at the stated values of organizations and then asked many individuals, team members within those organizations, to describe how effectively the organization was living and breathing those values through its actions. And what the outcome of this study proposes is that there is no correlation between what an organization says its values are and how it acts upon those values, right? So there's lots of different stuff getting in your way.
Yeah.
The architecture of your choices, to use that sort of behavioral economics framing again, is such that for you to understand what you're getting into, you would have to spend hours and hours and hours and hours. Not realistic. So do you care? Yes. Does the decision-making environment enable you to act upon the fact that you care about that stuff? No. Therefore, what do? You just get on with it, right? Because you've got shit to do. You're busy. You're a dad. You're a husband. You run a business. You know what I mean? So that's really important. Yes, we do care. The environment that we all interact with today doesn't enable us to act on that which we care about. And then, sorry, tell me the second question again. We dove down a rabbit hole there. Tell me, what was the second question?
It was the do we all get a bit rah about things
Yes.
when
Yeah.
with analytica and Facebook and all that sort of stuff happens, but then we forget.
Really good point. So yes, and the way that our memories tend to work, right, is in sort of like peaks and troughs, right? We remember highs and lows. We don't necessarily remember the consistent hum of life. So when things like that happen, they're memorable. And sometimes we do get a bit pissed off about them. Often, if you look at the way that people act, right? So let's say it's the Cambridge Analytica thing, and Facebook is a pretty woeful example of an organization in the context of, say, trustworthy corporate governance, right?
Yeah.
A really woeful example. I had hope for many years that they would evolve and mature and commit to trying to support a more socially preferable future, but they've demonstrated repeatedly that they will not do that. And the evidence is overwhelmingly in the favor of the fact that they are not trustworthy, right? And I'm not saying individuals that work for Facebook are bad people or untrustworthy people. The system that is Facebook is untrustworthy. Right. So yes, we do. We stand up, but then what do you do? Right? Like, you've got no meaningful action that you can take. You can't take on Facebook. You can't take on federal governments. You can't take on the client server architecture of the web, which, by the way, is not conducive to privacy and security by design, right? Because every single time you interact with the any digital product or service with the current sort of architecture, client server architecture that we're familiar with, like, data is sent all over the place, right? And that's why things like MadeSafe, the safe network, that's been in development for 14 years, is so exciting, because we can design a new internet that respects people's fundamental rights and freedoms in the design, right? So yes, we do stand up, we do get annoyed, we do get motivated, but it's really hard to take meaningful collective action at present, given the systems that we rely upon, the fact that most of our rights aren't really rights, and all that different type of stuff. That topic, though, in of itself is a super deep hole that we could dive into, which becomes kind of political and for some people very confrontational as well. So
I think when you consider sort of, what are the impacts of all the stuff that we're talking about, I think if you took sort of an extreme example, GFC of what was it, 10 years or so ago, when batches of bad mortgages were getting sold without those mortgage customers probably knowing. They might have had a letter or something that said, oh, by the way, something this and this happened. But I'm guessing very few people would have then contacted the bank and say, hey, who now owns my debt? We had huge sways in the US of these mortgages getting sold probably without people knowing, based on greed and arguably a huge lack of trust, which then eventually led to the GFC and the downfall of these huge financial institutions. Is that a really sort of extreme example of what you're talking about?
Yeah, look, it is, but even the people so these collateralized debt obligations, right? They were completely legal as far as I understand. No one was this is, sometimes people conflate ethics with law. They're not the same thing. At times they might be trying to achieve the same thing. Ethics being the decision-making process that we execute to, in given situation, make the best possible choice, right? The law and ethics are often trying to achieve different things. They might go about it different ways. They might actually end up with different outputs and sort of different decision-making processes. But they weren't doing anything illegal. The people within the system were just looking at the system and going, well, how do I optimize it for my means? The system enabled these corrupt incentive structures. And this is a really relevant point, right? So think of and I'll just bring it closer to home, right? Because the GFC, frankly, didn't hit us all that hard in Australia, right? We haven't had a proper recession for a very long time, and one is looming. That's another big topic, one that I'm definitely not properly qualified to talk about, but AIM Royal Banking Commission, right? Very long report comes out of that independent inquiry, 76 recommendations. One of them is really clear, and I think this is the fundamental recommendation or observation. There are misaligned incentive structures, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. As a result, financial institutions were literally rewarding misconduct.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
What do you mean you're rewarding misconduct? That is horrific, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's step back. What do we mean by misaligned incentive structures? So most of these organizations are publicly traded, right? Publicly traded corporations in Australia are sort of governed by the 2001 Corporations Act, right? I'm not a lawyer, so if you're a lawyer and you want to get down into the minutiae, like go for it. But let's talk about this at a high level to start with. The Corporations Act effectively mandates shareholder primacy. What do I mean by that? Directors must act in the best interest of their shareholders. That actually puts directors in a really shitty situation. Because let's just say the board of directors, right, responsible for corporate governance, setting strategy, identifying, managing risk, etc. They have to make a strategic decision about incentive structures, and they do that in such a way that it is optimizing for like an increase in shareholder value at the expense of consumer outcomes. This sort of shit happens all the time, right? And this is one of the reasons why the Hayne Royal Commission is so relevant. So does that make the directors bad people? Maybe some of them are, right? And that's also a very challenging argument to have. But no, it's just a shitty system. It doesn't work. If we have to design trustworthy organizations, we first and foremost need to align the incentives that an organization is optimizing for to the incentives that the individuals and other stakeholders that the organization serves. They need to come together, right? We need to be going on the same journey together. And that's probably why, you know, the business roundtable, that big thing with Jamie Dimon and all these sort of like super wealthy and influential CEOs came together, and they're like, maybe it's about stakeholders and not just shareholders. Wow, guys, what a fucking great insight. Like, that's transformational. Thanks for calling that out. Now, is that just kind of like ethics washing? So far, I think it is. I think it's very little meaningful action that's been taken, but it's important nonetheless. So like that stuff is really important, right? If we can't fix incentives, and another great example, right? Like Facebook's a good example, and I like picking on Facebook nowadays because I used to give them the benefit of the doubt. I used to try and support them, and now I've just given up. Like, just call them on their bullshit. So Facebook is continually optimizing for advertising revenues, basically at the expense of human well-being, at the expense of democracy, at the expense of bullying, and actually enabling hate speech, enabling conspiracy theories, etc., etc. Right? Like, and it's almost like, we have no responsibility for that. Yes, you fucking do. But free speech in this context has limitations. You know. So anyways, if we can't solve that sort of stuff, then Facebook isn't going to become ethical, as in doing the most socially preferable things with data. They're just not going to. But if you create alignment between key stakeholders of Facebook and Facebook as a corporation, holy crap, magic can happen, right? We can do good together. We can design a more socially preferable future. We can engage in data processing activities that people overwhelmingly support. They applaud, right? They don't cringe when they learn about them. They're like, that's great. So glad you guys did that.
Yeah. Going back to the terms and conditions part we spoke about earlier. So you give up your email address, your name, you create a password, you click say you've read the terms and conditions. Would a really simple thing for that business to do to be more trustworthy, once you've signed up, for them to like email you a copy of the terms and conditions and say, hey, these are the terms you signed. You might not have had a chance to read them when you signed up, but here they are. Why don't we follow up with you in a week, and you can reconfirm that you're comfortable with them. And if you're not, hey, talk to us. Yeah, that sort of thing. If I had that arrive in my inbox, I'd be like, wow, that's.
I can one up you on that, mate. So we actually have a formal methodology called the Better Disclosure Toolkit, right? And it's a series of evidence-based practices and considerations that enable us to design disclosure experiences, and that could be a data protection notice. That could be, gosh, a a personal loan contract, a home loan contract, an employment contract, like any disclosure context, right? I'm going to share my screen with you real quick right now so you can see this. And the last consideration area in better disclosure is referred to as like giving a receipt of the agreement, right? And that should sort of pop up there. So this is a fully populated better disclosure canvas. Yeah. This is for Regional Australia Bank's consumer data right policy. And if you're familiar with the consumer data right, you'll know that Regional Australia Bank was the first ever accredited data recipient, and we helped them with a lot of that process and lots of different stuff. They're relying on our models and methods, and this is one of them. But there's a lot more that we can do to design these experiences, because disclosure isn't just about like that point in time terms and conditions experience, right? It's actually the entire communication, like the communication or series of communicative interactions between different parties, like all part of disclosure, right? And the OECD did a systematic review of the behavioral insights literature on the topic of online disclosures a couple years back. And the first recommendation that they came out with for policymakers was, number one, don't rely on terms and conditions to communicate. Right. So it's just, I'll stop sharing now. It's like, I just wanted to highlight that, but it's a broken practice because we're trying to make, there's lots of different reasons this is broken. Number one, it's like disclosure experiences are written by lawyers for lawyers, right? They're not written for you, the consumer or the end user or the customer. They're written to protect the organization against things like class action lawsuits, right? So that's a big thing. Now, one of the fundamental premises of our approach to better disclosure is that the consumer outcome is what we prioritize. So for instance, and I'll while I'm talking about this, I'll get something up in the background. So the fundamental premise is that we optimize for consumer outcomes, right? Yep. And one of the things that's really important to that is that we actually define like the metrics that matter, right? You signing the contract shouldn't be the metric that we prioritize for, because if all I want you to do is tick a box and move on, then I can design a dark UX pattern that's actually utilizing manipulative techniques to get you to do that. Super easy. Basically every organization does it today. But if I say I'm optimizing for an informed action, meaning you understand the terms of the agreement that you're getting into, that's a very different experience, right? But I might also balance that with like time to comprehension or time to informed action, because if it takes you 2 hours to get the gist, that's not good enough, right? So I'll really quickly show you the draft data protection notice for Greater Than Learning, the platform I was telling you about before, right? So it's a bit of a different kettle of fish. We use all of those better disclosure techniques that I was talking about. We lead with values. We break components down and utilize layering techniques, et cetera, et cetera. So if you interact with this video, 60 to 90-second video, you're going to basically get the gist of this, right? So in 60 seconds, you're going to pretty much get what we do with data, why we do it, how we protect it, what your rights are, all that different type of good stuff, right? In a very short period of time. Cool. And we've got a lot of different, one example, right, for everyone out there, if you're designing terms and conditions experiences, if you utilize this tactic that you see right here, which is called an upfront time to read indicator. The behavioral insights team in the UK did some great research on this last year. They called it kind of like randomized control trials, but really they were multivariate tests, whatever, right? This increases the likelihood that people actively engage with the terms and conditions experience by 105%. This one variable, right? And then, so we've got all this different type of stuff. You want to learn about the agreement bypass bias. There it is. How does our business work? Here's how it works. Here are all of the different ways in which we use data, et cetera, et cetera. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of work that goes into this sort of stuff, right? You have to do personal data mapping, and you have to become very data literate as an organization. But we're in an information economy, right?
Yeah.
Like our businesses run based on data. And this is our key decision log, right? So one of the things that we're doing as a result of an attempt to be participatorily governed is opening up our key decision log.
Yeah.
Right. I'll just give you, here you go. Here's differentiating our terms of service. So this is going to be publicly available. Like this is a true commitment to openness, transparency, and accountability, right? We weren't going to design a normal terms and conditions experience. We were going to design something that was fundamentally different, and it's referred to as our relationship agreement, right? So those are the types of things very practically that organizations can start doing that don't require that much work, but they do require a shift in mindset, right? We all have, like within organizations, within cross-functional product design and development teams, for instance, we have skills to do that stuff.
Yeah.
But we just got to prioritize it. And I think that what we're going to start seeing emerge progressively, and we already are starting to see this, is that organizations become really intent. Like going back to that Edelman data, right? In the context of that quadrant, the sort of net trust score, they're going to start amplifying their focus and investments in those ethical dimension style activities.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, they are not going to benefit from high trust relationships.
Yeah.
And we as individuals participating in a very complex, nuanced, and ambiguous society, we're not going to benefit from trustworthy products and services that help make our lives better.
Yeah. So a lot of businesses hire data analysts, and the data science space is one that's obviously taken off in the last few years. Used to work very heavily in that space. Do we think that there may be a new job coming up, a new role coming up at some stage of like the chief data trust officer, or is that going to be wrapped up into security, or what do we think is going to happen?
Yeah, like ultimately ethics has got to be everyone's job, right? Yeah. So if you think about there are lots of different ways to look at this though. So yes, you could have a chief trust officer. Yes, you could have a chief data ethics officer, but they are one component of a broader, complex system view of how do we as an organization be verifiably ethical, verifiably trustworthy?
Yeah.
It's stuff that the board has to do, right? You have to change your board composition. If all you have are lawyers and accountants on your board, not going to cut it, right? You need people from the social sciences. You might need a moral philosopher that formally studies ethics, that formally studies the applied ethics of technology. You might want like a cross-functional sort of like quant attitudinal behavioral researcher. You might want actually a technologist. Wouldn't that be novel? You might want someone that has been designing, deploying, and optimizing algorithms, like working in quote unquote AI for the last 30 years. Like you got to change the composition of your board, because you will become responsible at that top level of the organization at some point for, just like you are today for corporate governance, for information or data governance, right? I think that's really important. And then we need broad recognition of this. And the reason that's important is because that then explicitly becomes part of the organization's framing, explicitly part of their strategy. Therefore, they have to take action on it.
Yeah.
And then, up and down the org, this shouldn't be like a top-down command control approach. It's got to be both ground up, grassroots, and top down. Like that, that's when really incredible stuff happens. When right at the top of the organization, something's supported, and right at the bottom of the organization, I hate using that fucking framing, but I'm just going to use it for the sake of simplicity, is supported as well, right? Those are things that like really, really matter. But then there's a lot of like super functional stuff, right? So one of the epic failings of data ethics initiatives today is that they're all principles based. There is no meaningful action that any of these organizations have really taken. Like maybe IBM not doing facial recognition tech. That's probably the biggest, most significant thing that a large organization has done or said no to, because they have an explicit ethical position on, right? For the most part, principles-based approaches are not enough. You have to build out like operational approaches to stuff like data ethics. And that requires a whole of organization approach. And ultimately, that's not about documentation or anything like that. That's about how do people behave on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And how do we engineer the properties and model for the behaviors that will enable us to be worthy of people's trust, to be verifiably ethical. Often we tend to think of these things in a silo. Oh yeah, let's just hire a chief data ethics officer and then that's it, right? Like she's going to take care of it. He's going to take care of it. They're going to take care of it. I don't believe that's the case. I think this stuff is way too integral to the way that our society works, the way that modern society works, for it to be compartmentalized. This has to become a whole of organization approach. And that's really empowering as well. Right? Because if you're a junior UX designer, you're also responsible for ethics. You have the right to say no to something that you are ethically uncomfortable with. You have the right to contest that. And in no way, shape, or form can your role be hindered by you saying no because you are ethically uncomfortable. Like we've done a lot of work with very large organizations on operationalizing data ethics frameworks.
Yeah.
We have quite a mature practice in that space. Although it seems big and it seems burdensome, it doesn't have to be. It can be done progressively. It can be done pragmatically.
Yeah.
But it's actually really empowering when you think that every single person within an organizational context make a meaningful contribution to the way that the organization approaches ethics.
Yeah. And imagine if you were a CEO and you knew that every one of your customers trusted you, chose you because they know that you're ethical and trustworthy, recommended you to their friends when they saw stuff on the news about a competitor, having a data breach or whatever it might be. They go, "That's all right. I'm with such and such," and that doesn't happen there. Imagine feeling that empowered from a customer perspective, and that then impacting revenue.
Yeah, and I think so. That would be a great feeling. There's no such thing as perfect. Every organization is going to make mistakes. A massive part of an organization's trustworthiness is its willingness to own the consequence of its actions.
Yeah.
Right. Now, before we end, I'm going to give you a real funny example. I know I've been sharing. I like making things feel real, right? Because so often we talk about things in this sort of context and they're hypothetical, and people are like, "Yeah, it sounds great, but I'm not sure I really get it." You know what I mean? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share a little fuck up that I did recently. Oops, turn my video off. I'm very willing to open up and be accountable to this fuck up. Okay, so one of the things that we're doing is attempting to evolve the structure of greater than learning in terms of its governance to be very participatory in nature. And we are willing to be vulnerable to our actions. We are willing to make mistakes. And we are attempting to, or we are seeking advice, contribution, and direct collaboration from our early community supporters and members to try and help us do what is most socially preferable, something they overwhelmingly support, right? So one of the things is our cookie consent notice. Now, cookie consent is super broken. Consent and tracking technologies don't act. Consent as a legal fiction and tracking technologies don't really go all that well together. It's a super big topic in of itself. I'm not going to touch on that right now. So what I did was I posted, I wanted to get some feedback on the work that we've been doing. Now I posted this and it kind of seems a bit arrogant, right? Is this the best cookie notice you've ever seen? Now we're having a laugh, right? We want the brand to be superhuman. We're tackling really big topics, but it doesn't mean we can't do it without our touch of humanity. Yeah. And what I did was I took a fucking screen grab of the wrong thing. This was in dev mode after a state transition where someone had already said yes or no, right? So the de facto state is if you don't do anything, we don't track you. Simple as that. If you say no, we don't track you. If you say yes, then we, the cookies drop, right? Like we store the cookies. But this looks like people don't get a choice, right? It looks like a manipulative dark pattern. And I didn't realize that. I just done it quickly. I was just trying to get it out there. And everyone's like, this thing's just gone kind of bonkers, right? And there's layers upon layers of detail here. And I was just like, oh shit, where did that go? And I was just kind of like, oh no, look what I've done. And I've just said, guys, I've got to own up here. I've completely screwed up. I'm feeling a bit silly. I've dudded out. Here's actually the notice that we've designed. And interestingly, that type of thing, in the eyes of people is super respect. And this is me. This is a personal story because I think it's important that we make these things like personal. the same thing can be done by an organization, right? Like Equifax, right? When they knew about the data breach, a few executives sold stock. They made millions of dollars before they notified regulators and the public of the data breach.
Yeah.
Like, if that's not untrustworthy, I don't know what is. What they should have done is the equivalent of what I did there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's that willingness to be vulnerable to your actions, that willingness to, which is really important in the context of trust and the formal definitions that are thrown around most frequently. But that willingness to own the consequence of our actions, that's like one of the biggest things, right? Yeah. You know, yes, we've got to be going in the right direction. We want our intent to be ethical. We want the outcomes to be preferable. But if we do screw up, in fact, when we do screw up, how we act is what really matters. And you know, if people take nothing away from this, maybe that's a good message to finish on.
Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it? What you do is who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
It's not what you write on your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
Right? It's how you act. It's how you treat people. It's the decisions that you make on a daily basis.
That's it. Mate, we could talk for hours about this, and if I didn't have other things to do, I'd absolutely love to, and maybe we should another time. But mate, thank you. This has been brilliant. I'll add your personal details in the comments.
Yeah, perfect.
And if people want to talk to you, if organizations want to talk to you and get a view on some of the stuff they're doing, I'm sure that you'd be happy to talk to them.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely.
Beautiful. Mate, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure. Enjoy the rest of your day, and you and I will no doubt speak soon.
Thanks, mate. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks, buddy.